Welcome to another video, to another section. In this section, we will be talking about backend testing, specifically API testing. Backend testing can mean a lot of things. We are going to focus on API testing, and I'll explain why. Well, technically, because most of the jobs are in API testing. All right, so what is backend testing, or what is backend to even begin with, right? Backend is the stuff that we do not see. It's behind the scenes. Right? A lot of times we use applications, we are interacting with the front end. Most of us as consumers or as end users, we are using the front end. Whether you're on a mobile app, you're using the front end, or in a browser using web applications or websites, we are interacting with the front end of that application. It's the stuff that we can see. But whatever action we take, there is something in the back end that is actually doing the magic. Most of the magic actually happens in the back end. Most of the time, right? Here in the slide I have every front end has a back end, right? Every is a strong word, but that's almost true. Sure, there might be situations where everything lives in the front end, the site or the app does not have a lot of functionality, but 99% of the things we use, there's some kind of backend. Just assuming anything that has a login, it will have a backend, right? It needs to manage users at the very least. So backend is very, very popular. I mean, not even popular. Basically, every application has a backend, and not every application has a front end though. So like one front end can have a lot of backend. It might be interacting with a lot of different services or a lot of different softwares in the backend. So in my opinion, in the job market, there are more jobs for backend engineers or backend automation engineers than it is for front end, because just for that pure logic. When you think about companies like OpenAI or companies like Cisco, just think about Cisco. Cisco doesn't have a lot of front end. They all do networking stuff, and all networking stuff is happening in the back, right? There's no front end. There are some front end things that they use internally, but when you think about in general, everything they build, it's a lot of back end stuff. So they're going to have tons and tons of back end testing, testing jobs available. So it is my opinion, and I do strongly feel that backend, there's more opportunities in backend. So any automation engineer or any software tester would need to understand how to test both the front end and the backend. My favorite is definitely the backend when it comes to automation. When it comes to manual testing, it's give and take. But for automation, definitely I love working on backend test because it's just way more stable. All right, so why is BE testing? So BE going forward, I might say BE a lot for backend. Why is it important? Because we're testing the reliability and stability of the application. It's the core logic of the application. When you go to a page and you buy something, once you purchase something, it's the backend that's handling a lot of that, all of that stuff, right? Making sure the order gets achieved correctly or received correctly. The shipping address, billing address, make sure the payment goes through, make sure taxes are calculated correctly, making sure it gets shipped out, making sure the user gets updates, emails get sent out saying thank you for your order, here is the tracking information. All of that important things happen after the order is placed. It's happening in the backend. So it's a really core functionality. That was just an example of an e-commerce, but when you think about anything else, just every app, every website, the login is the most important thing. And being able to manage the users is a backend process. It's a backend functionality, and it's extremely important. Data integrity, that goes with the same examples that I just talked about, right? In e-commerce, when you place an order, all that data has to be recorded correctly. It have to go in a lot of different locations. It's not just the order goes into one place. A lot of times, there's a lot of different databases, a lot of different APIs that get hit in the back, because financial engineering people want something. The lawyers want you to make sure some data is stored correctly. The e-commerce people itself, the coupon people, the marketing people, they all want that data to be somewhere in different formats. So the data have to be very, very clean and safe and reliable. So data integrity is a big part of why we do backend testing, like a major part of backend testing. And security, I myself have not dealt with security a lot, but security is part of the backend, right? Making sure the APIs are only accessible through some kind of credentials, or they're accessible only from within a network. There's a lot of security that goes into a software, especially something that the public access. Performance is another part of backend testing, right? Like, how does the application perform? What happens when there's a lot of load onto it? That is its own thing. A lot of times there are QAs or software testers that just focus on performance, load testing, stress testing. There are specialized tools just for that, right? There are people like to just do that full time. There are situations where like normal QAs that will do both, right? In my experience, I've always had responsibility to do the front-end testing, back-end testing, and load testing at the same time. So when we build a new application, usually like a new API, a new service, usually I don't have the front end when you build a service, but the back end, making sure it works correctly, right? Doing functional testing. That's what we're going to be talking about most of this in this course, at least in this section of this course. But I would also have to write some load tests. I used to use Gatling or Cloud Test for that. So you have to do performance testing. Cost, right? Not QAs don't usually do this, but I can see a scenario where QAs are looking into it, keeping an eye on cost. Do we need all the servers for this application, right? That also goes with the load test. You're going to do a load test and you can say, oh, one server can handle 1 million users. So do we really need 10 servers because we're only expecting 500,000 users, right? You can do the analysis based on the performance. You can save cost by saying, hey, we don't need these beefy big servers. We can just go with the smaller server and we'll be good. Right, so that's why it's important. Backend, knowing the backend in terms of reliability, in terms of the data, in terms of security, in terms of performance, in terms of cost, and I'm sure there are more other reasons I can come up with, but those are really the core reasons why backend testing is super important. All right, so what are some common types of backend testing? You have API testing. Basically, we're just validating endpoints. Endpoints are, or APIs are, how two different applications talk to each other. There's going to be a few examples coming up. So that one of the major testings in the backend testing is testing APIs, and that's what we're going to do in this course. We're going to focus on API testing. Specifically, we're going to focus on REST API testing. Integration testing, which is, it goes hand to hand with API testing, is just testing how different components of the application work together. Usually, you have the concept of microservices, for example. For one action, there might be a bunch of different backends that just talk to each other and come up with a decision or come up with the data that you need. So that would be an integration testing. There's different kinds of integration testing, but I would put that in backend testing. Database testing is when you focus just purely on the database. A lot of the API testing, we actually work with the database. We make an API call. We go to the database and check if the stuff that's supposed to happen actually happened. But sometimes you just test the database itself. Databases themselves have a lot of code inside. Right, you have SQLs, you have stored procedures, you have functions. So you might be testing just purely the database itself. All the functions, all the SQLs are running correctly. You might be writing tests for those SQLs. So there are things that are just focusing on database, right? Data integrity is part of that, but also API testing, data integrity is part of that as well. Performance and load testing, I just talked about that earlier. Is pretty much another type of backend testing where you are testing the application, see if it performs under load. It's load testing. Security testing, pretty straightforward, right? Self-explanatory. That's another type of backend testing. All right, so APIs. Like I said, we're going to focus on API testing. Most of my backend experience has been RESTful APIs, but there is different kinds of APIs. There is SOAP API and there is GraphQL. SOAP is pretty much dead or dying. It's an old school. GraphQL is new. It was like growing really fast, but right now it's kind of stable, but it's there. But once you learn how to test RESTful APIs, then everything else is very similar, just a small differences. So we're just going to focus on REST, so I'm not going to overwhelm you. And most of the job market, they're just going to ask you for REST. Then nobody's going to say, oh, you know how to test REST APIs, but you don't know how to test GraphQL. Nobody's going to say that, because if you know how to test API, you know how to test API. All right, so that's why we're going to focus on that. So API stands for Application Programming Interface. It enables communication between software systems, uses protocols like REST or SOAP. In modern web application, REST is the most common. So that's why we're going to focus on REST. So the word API, you're going to hear it all the time. Majority of the time when somebody says API, they're talking about RESTful APIs or they're talking about API calls. But the word API is very, very vague. Application Programming Interface, anything can be an API. Python itself is an API. When you're working with Python is a programming language. When you're working with Python, there are functions that are defined within Python. You automatically get them. You just say one word and it does a bunch of things. That is an API. That's for you to interface with the system to tell it what to do. Hence, interface in the name, right? So API, the word, be cautious. It can mean a lot of things, but most of the time, 99% of the time, when somebody says API, they're talking about RESTful APIs. All right, so REST API, we'll talk about that. The best way to see what REST API is to actually see it, you use it, and that's what we're going to do. Literally after this video, all we're going to do is actually use APIs. It's not a lot of slides, it's not a lot of theory in this section. GraphQL is another one. Facebook invented it a few years ago. It's kind of new, but it grew in popularity. And when we're looking at examples of REST, I'll talk about GraphQL because they look very much similar. So overview of APIs. APIs are used for one application to talk to another application. So you build something and somebody else builds something and you want to use their resource, you want to use their capabilities, you use API to talk to them. Your software will talk to another software using APIs. Those two softwares will talk to each other. The front end can talk to the back end via an API. When you say log in, there's different ways to do it, but it could use an API to say, hey, is this user valid? It will send a request to the server using an API, and the server will respond with an API. Basically, that's how it works. Two softwares, the front end being one software, the back end being another software, talk to each other with API. So if you build some kind of functionality, you can expose it for other people to use your functionality, and they can pay you for it, right? For example, OpenAI created ChatGPT, so they have AI, they have the brain of AI, right? It's one of the providers. And if you want to build an application that uses AI, you don't have to invent AI yourself. You don't have to create all the logic and all the brain, that smart thing. You don't have to do that. All you have to do is you can just make an API call to OpenAI. It's just OpenAI is just a name. It sounds AI, so it sounds like API, but totally different things. API is just a generic term. So OpenAI has their functionality. They have their AI. And you have an idea to build some fancy app. You can use API. You can talk to them using API, and you pay them. Every time you make an API call, you make a request, they're going to charge you for some money. So we're going to look at a few other examples, okay? So someone creates a functionality, others can use it, and it's very, very easy to implement. That's the beauty of using APIs, is if I build some software that has some special functionality and somebody wants to use it, the implementation is quite straightforward. So here are some examples, right? So Google Maps. Google created the functionality of maps, right? Awesome map, really powerful. It has pretty much the entire world. It has all the businesses on there, all the location, all the parks, everything on the streets, and everything on the Google Map. Now, other companies want information about maps. They're not going to build maps themselves, right? An example would be Zillow. Zillow is a real estate company. Most of you know it. Zillow or Redfin or whoever company that does real estate, they need map. They need to know locations, addresses, houses, and all of that, right? As a company, they don't have to build that technology. They don't have to have cars drive around mapping the world. They don't. They're just going to use Google Maps API. They're going to talk to Google using their API because Google has all the information they need. So they're going to use API and get the information from Google, and they're going to pay Google. So Google Map is free, but I'm pretty sure, I didn't look into this, but I'm pretty sure for corporate like Zillow, if you want to use it with APIs, you're going to pay. Every time you make a request, you're going to pay. So you build your app and you embed Google API, Google Map into that. Uber, the same thing. Uber uses map, right? The entire thing is based on a map, and they don't have to build their own map. They just use Google Map. Airbnb, the same thing, right? You can just think of it. You build an app, you need some kind of map functionality, then you're going to use Google's APIs. So as another example would be Stripe API or PayPal API, right? This is a payment gateway. You want to build a website where you process payments. You don't have to figure out all the technology to process payments. How do I talk to banks? How do I validate credit cards are valid or not? Or ATM cards or debit cards have value in them or not? You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to create that sophisticated software, and you have to deal a lot with government, right? When you're dealing with payments, you don't have to do all that. If you just want to sell stuff, you're going to use Stripe's API. Stripe or PayPal or any of those companies, they figured out how to do all that. They figured out how to deal with credit cards, how to deal with bank accounts, how to deal with banks, how to deal with the government. They already figured all that out. They have systems that handle all of that, right? So you don't have to do none of that. They will give you an API. They have to tell you how to talk to them. Whenever somebody provides API, they'll have to give you documentation. How do you use that API? And we're going to spend a lot of time looking at that. And so we just use an API, you talk to them, somebody comes to your website, gives you a credit card, all you do is you take the credit card, you don't even store it, you just send it to them, they're responsible for it, not you. So that is another example of using APIs. Weather API, this open weather API, it has weather information. They probably have sensors everywhere that they collect weather data from everywhere. So if I need to create some kind of product, some kind of application, some kind of software that needs weather, I don't have to go put sensors all over the world. All I could do is use their API, make an API call. I'm just going to send a request saying, hey, give me the weather for Las Vegas. They're going to give it to me and I'm going to use it in my app. So on your phone, you have this weather app, right? Apple don't have their own sensors and things all over the world. Samsung don't have that, but they have an app on the phone. So they just use APIs. They just use API. They probably pay for it. It's free. The weather app is free, so I would imagine there is some kind of free tier for the weather app, or Apple has some kind of contract with them. Okay, at least on Apple, I'm an iPhone user. On Apple, there's the weather app is there. I'm sure there's tons of other free apps. So that's how APIs are used. Another example would be case.io. The case.io is the test case management system that we used. They have APIs. If you want to manage test cases and test runs systematically, they have APIs that you're going to use to talk to their service. You want to create a test case, you don't necessarily have to go to the UI and create a test case. You can use APIs, and there's reasons for that. You can create scripts, automatically create test cases, or you have, let's say you have 100 test cases, 1,000 test cases in Excel spreadsheet, and you want to migrate that to case.io. You're just going to write a simple script that will read your sheet and make API call to send those test cases into case.io. The case.io is one of the APIs we're going to use in this section as examples. We're going to play with it. We're going to test it and things like that. Okay. Last thing, this is just what an API would look like. Just to give you a little quick, preview. On the next one, we're really going to look at it. Normally, you would have the URL like this, like HTTP, blah, 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 the full address. And then you have the data, the stuff that you're going to send. In this case, it's saying create a product. In fact, this is not really a complete one. It doesn't even say it is post. I'm quite surprised with that one. But you're going to see a bunch of things like this. This is what an API looks like, a RESTful API looks like. But don't worry about this slide, because we're going to do this. You are going to do this a lot coming up in the next several videos. All right. So that has been a long introduction to APIs and backend testing. Hopefully that made sense. If it doesn't, don't worry about it. You can revisit later. After you use the APIs, if you come back and watch these videos, oh, that's what he was explaining. But starting the next video is going to be hands-on. We're really going to dive in and start using APIs. So it's all going to make sense very soon. So let's keep going, and I'll see you on the next one.